she, her, forgot that. I forgot to put the phone down. Mhm. All right, everybody, we are going to get started. Thank you all so much for joining us for our COVID-19 Individual Artists and Creative Workers update. You'll see today's agenda on the screen here. Thank you all so much for joining. We were able to have a registration so that we can send you all of this info in this PowerPoint after this meeting, as well as the recording for this meeting too. So we'll first start with an update about the city of Boston and where we're at in terms of numbers for COVID-19, and I'll leave it to Julia Ryan to take us off.
Hi, everyone. My name is Julia Ryan, and I'm our Artist Resource Manager in the Mayor's Office of Arts and Culture. And I'm going to be talking today about relief fund opportunities and also just giving you all some updates about coronavirus in Boston. So as of April 28th, we have about 8,421 confirmed cases in Boston. Of those, about 1,700 have fully recovered and 314 have died. We have an update from last week about Boston Public Schools, which is that they'll be closed for the rest of the school year. So that is new, and we are going to keep you all updated about that as best as we can going forward. We also have an update about the date that the city was considering for reopening for non-essential businesses. So the city had estimated that date being May 4th. It is now keeping that timeline open-ended. So we don't have a date for that right now, but we also will just keep everyone updated about that as best we can through our text services and through the boston.gov coronavirus update website. We still are encouraging some of the same social and physical distancing measures. So face coverings, and also staying in from 9 p.m. to 6 a.m. every day. One new and exciting, important thing that we wanted to talk to you all about today is we have released a survey for creative workers and artists in partnership with Mass Creative and several of our other nonprofit arts organization colleagues throughout the state. We're really excited to capture how this time is affecting artists, gig workers, freelancers, and all creative workers throughout our state. And we want to use this information to really equitably resource all of our creative community and also really tell stories. So to really capture for our state how this is affecting our creative economy. And just with that, I really, hope you'll all take that survey, and we also hope that you'll share it with everyone you know who it might be relevant to. So to talk about relief funds today, I just wanted to kind of fly through a few quick updates about our relief fund, and then mention a few relief funds that might be relevant to you all today. So the Boston Artist Relief Fund is still accepting applications. We have partnered with the Boston Center for the Arts as a fundraising partner, and they have raised over $125,000 as of today. We have 885 applications as of today as well. So we're doing our best to continue filling those applications as best as we can while we continue to raise more funding. We have been able to fund 157 of those so far, and it looks like we will soon be able to fund, I think, about 50 more. And then I believe following that, we're going to be able to continue funding more applications. So we're going to keep it open as long as we can. And we're just going to keep doing our best to raise the money that we really need to get all of our needs met right now. So a few other local funds that I want to mention today. The Music Maker Relief Fund through the Record Co. has an upcoming deadline of April 30th. So that is almost done. So definitely get that application in soon if you can. It's of up to $200 for Boston area musicians. So those are musicians in the greater Boston area as defined by the catchment area that the Boston Foundation uses. And you can learn more about that on their website. There's also still open for applications the Cambridge Artist Relief Fund, the Theater Community Benevolent Fund, and the Keep Your Distance Fest Pair Fund. So the Cambridge Artist Relief Fund is open to artists of all different disciplines. It's open to artists who live in Cambridge. The Theater Community Benevolent Fund is open for theater practitioners. And the Pair Fund, Keep Your Distance Fest, is open to musicians who have performed at PASIM over the past 10 years. And they also require a participation in a virtual Keep Your Distance Fest, which is a virtual music festival that they're running. So those are all still open. We also, in addition to those, I want everyone to know about the Arts and Culture Leaders of Color Emergency Fund. Those are grants of up to $200, and that's for Black, Indigenous, people of color, artists, and arts administrators in the United States. And anyone can apply to that from Boston or otherwise. There's also the Foundation for Contemporary Arts Emergency Grants. So that's also a national fund. Those are grants of up to $1,500 for individual artists who work in contemporary or experimental arts of any discipline. And there's no deadline on that one. And then in addition to that, the Harpo Foundation has a relief, it's actually a grant that they are extending the deadline for because of COVID-19. So this is a grant for visual artists. The deadline is May 2nd, and it's open for anyone who lives in the United States, and the awards are up to $10,000.
Julie, before you go on, we have a question from Jody. Do you have to reapply for the Artist Fund if you applied when it first opened? Are you looking at applications since it has been open?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm happy you asked, Jody. So we have been reviewing the applications as they arrived, and so we've been reviewing the amount, basically, of applications we have to fund as we go through them, and so we've raised enough funding now to fund, I think, getting close to 200 of the 885 applications. We received the vast majority of our applications actually in the first several days that it was open. So we're still actually kind of in the beginning bracket of applications that we're going through right now. So if you haven't heard back yet, it's likely because your application just hasn't been gotten to yet in the review process. And we, will continue to review them as more funds become available. One thing that is worth mentioning and just reminding everyone of is that the Boston Artist Relief Fund is for artists who have residential addresses in Boston, and we require that. So we are looking for that in the application, and that's why we're not only talking about that relief fund today, but lots of other ones as well. So another one that has come up is the Cape Cod Arts Relief Fund, and that's for artists who live, work, create, or perform in Cape Cod. Those are grants of up to $500 as well, and that has no deadline. And then there's also the Parent Artist Advocacy League Emergency Relief Fund, which is for artists who are, have families and are facing taking care of their families more often or needing more financial support to take care of their families right now. And that has no deadline. It's also open to artists of all disciplines across the country. And the last one on this slide I wanted to mention, because I know so many artists in our community are also people who work in the service industry. There's a relief fund for people who work in restaurants, nightclubs, and cafes and bars of up to 30 hours a week, which is open in several states, but actually started in this state. These are all basically related to writers. So we have the PEN America Writers Emergency Fund. That's $500 to $1,000, no deadline. You just have to live in the United States. We have the Queer Writers of Color Relief Fund, which is of up to $500 for queer writers of color in the United States. There's the Maurice Sendak Emergency Fund, which is grants of up to $2,500, and that has an upcoming deadline of May 3rd. But that is just for people who are writers of children's books, and also artists who work in children's picture books. And then lastly, we have the Dramatists Guild Foundation Emergency Relief Fund, which is for playwrights, composers, lyricists, and librettists. And that also has no deadline. And I'm almost done. So we have the Arts Leaders of Color Emergency Fund. Did I mention that one already? I feel like I did. I might have.
It's okay.
Well, I'll just mention it again. That's for Black, Indigenous, and people of color artists and arts administrators, $200. And then the Theater Offensive has a COVID relief fund for queer, trans, people of color artists and youth. That is open until May 8th. And those are $200 grants for young people who participated in True Colors Out Youth Theater, or for adult, queer, trans, people of color performing artists and youth in the Boston area affected by COVID-19. And then we have the International Bluegrass Music Association. So this is a grant for bluegrass musicians and people who work in the bluegrass industry. That also is open nationally with no deadline. And those are all my relief funds for today. So if you have any questions about those, I know that that was a lot of information and a lot of long links. So what we'll do is follow up after this with everyone who registered to make sure you have all of those links going forward.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Julia. We will be sending this PowerPoint out to all of the people who are able to register, and we'll also have the recording of the PowerPoint up on the boston.gov website. All right, I would like to give it to Luke from the VLA to talk a little bit about unemployment and the CARES Act.
Thanks, Pascal. So yes, I'm Luke Blackadar. I'm the director of the Volunteer Lawyers for the Arts of Massachusetts. I'm an arts attorney, and among other things, one of our programs is that we match low-income artists and arts organizations with affordable legal representation. And I'm just going to talk briefly about some of the major legal updates we've had in the last week and some of our programming that we've done to respond to it and some of our offerings related to that. So there have really been two huge legal updates within the last week or so. Big one, I'm sure many of you are familiar with, is the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program, which was released last Monday. And for those who are not familiar with it, the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program is the federal program that expands unemployment benefits to traditionally ineligible populations. So chiefly for us, independent contractors, gig workers, self-employed individuals, business owners, et cetera, self-employed business owners. So that application dropped last Monday, and for those of you who have already been through the process, your mileage may have varied, or there have been some complications or challenges with it, or it's been a bit of a complicated process. And we totally understand, we recognize that we understand it's a very new system. And I can tell you from having spoken to our colleagues at the New York VLA, they've had virtually the same problems with their own rollout. So everyone's kind of flying by the seat of their pants with that program. Um, but so a little bit, briefly about that program, because one of the common questions we've been receiving about that is, okay, the program's been dropped, so how do I know which one to apply for? What's the right, do I apply for traditional unemployment? Do I apply for the pandemic unemployment assistance? Which is right for me? And currently, the criteria that we're relying upon from the Department of Unemployment Assistance is if in 2019 you had at least $5,100 in tax withheld W-2 income, then you will apply for traditional unemployment insurance. And if you're below that threshold, most of your income derives from 1099 income, self-employment income, et cetera, then you will apply directly for pandemic unemployment assistance. And I recognize that some people fall into different categories and they fall into criteria that might not match that. For example, maybe I have income from out of state, or I have some other strange combination thereof, and I've been bounced around. We get it, and that's a query we've got a lot. The DUA is still working on rolling out the program, and there's still a lot of kinks with it. And our unemployment system, as it existed, didn't really contemplate a lot of the way people work currently, even in more traditional professions where maybe you have your main W-2 income and then you have a couple side hustles. We're still working to adapt to that, and that's what the program is really there for, to kind of meet those populations, but just recognize that it's still a work in progress. But to that end, one of our main programs right now is we're doing one-to-one technical assistance to help people who are having trouble with those applications. What is the eligibility? What do I need to know? I have this unique circumstance. What should I apply for? So anyone who needs assistance with the pandemic unemployment assistance application, the SBA Paycheck Protection Program, which was just replenished last week, another $310 billion got into that program. And the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, also administered by the SBA, was also replenished, another, I believe, $10 billion. So for assistance with applying for any of those programs, we still offer one-to-one technical support, currently in 15-minute chunks. But if you're having trouble with that and that's something you're interested in or you feel that you are eligible for and you haven't yet applied, then you're absolutely welcome to contact us about that. I know that my colleague Alexis is on the call, and she has been basically threw together an entire tech support program overnight, and she and her intern have been staffing it and firing on all pistons for almost a month now. So we're here to help, and just a shout out to all of the work they've been doing. I logged into our company call this morning, and I just saw all the calls on her schedule, and it was absolutely unreal. So that's really the short unemployment update. The other big legal update is that we recently, on same day, last Monday, Governor Baker finally signed into law the eviction and foreclosure moratorium bill. So that is now law, that is now active and effective. And just as the name implies, it creates a temporary moratorium for the duration of the state of emergency here in Massachusetts on any eviction processes and any foreclosures. So it importantly prohibits creditors, so mortgage holders, landlords, property owners, and courts from filing and enforcing and enacting any eviction or foreclosure actions. So really important that not in addition to the property holders and the creditors, the people who are owed payments, the law also puts a limitation on courts. And it deals with all non-emergency evictions. Really, an emergency eviction deals with ultimately an eviction that has to be carried out for the safety and health of the people involved. So the general public, visitors, property owners, professional law enforcement, health professionals, et cetera, people who need access to that space. Those would be an emergency evictions. Those are not covered by this, but those evictions that relate to late rent payments or missed rent payments or things like that, those are currently covered by this moratorium. And so right now you cannot be evicted for non-payment of rent. The law doesn't excuse you from fulfilling your rent or mortgage payment obligations, but it just currently and temporarily prevents the courts and your property owners from actually taking matters into their own hands and actually going to pursue summary process foreclosure activities. So for those of you who are currently in dire straits and stressed out about that, know that that is a protection that you have right now. You can't be thrown out of your space. Even in normal circumstances under regular summary process, you can't immediately be thrown out of your place without going through the courts and going through an eviction trial. But just know now that not even the courts can enforce that right now. And I believe the Supreme Judicial Court of Massachusetts, I believe just last night, extended their order that was keeping trial courts and appellate courts closed for non-emergency hearings, I think until June now. It was originally May 4th. I think now they're looking at early June. So no judge is going to be looking at those cases right now. So I think that's my main legal update. Otherwise, VLA is still providing fee waivers for any artists and arts organizations that are affected financially or physically by COVID-19. So we don't want the cost of acquiring legal services and seeking a lawyer to be prohibitive to you right now, because we know a lot of people are in dire straits and cash flow is a concern. So all of our legal service application fees are waived for anyone who's dealing with COVID-19 or has a COVID-19 related legal issue, contracts, employment, insurance. And we also still have our team of, I'd say, about 9 large law firms, national law firms, who are ready to help people with contract issues, employment issues, landlord-tenant issues, insurance problems, anything COVID-19 related. So we do want to keep that as a resource, and those attorneys are still ready, willing, and able to assist. And other than that, we're still providing our one-to-one support, like I said. We're still adding and constantly updating our legal resources on our website, and I'll leave the link in the chat. But we just last week recorded a video, kind of an update to our original unemployment insurance video. This one covers more specifically some frequently asked questions relating to the pandemic unemployment assistance program. So again, how do I manage if I have income from both 1099 and W-2s? What do I do if I've earned income in another state? What do I do if, you know, my W-2 income is so small? Do I need to report it? Do I need to continue certifying my need for unemployment every week? Things like that. A lot of the questions that we've been receiving pretty frequently since the pandemic unemployment assistance program came out. So that's a resource that's available. And we still have a number of guides. We just updated our eviction and foreclosure moratorium law one sheet FAQ guide. And we also update, you know, our CARES Act, our PPP, our EIDL loan, all of those documents, we update them honestly on a rolling basis as new information comes available, but usually it shakes out to about once a week. So that's generally what I have. Oh, and Julie asked a question. Received a question yesterday about if an artist starts a fundraiser like a Patreon right now, is that income relevant to their unemployment application? I would defer to Alexis's judgment on that, but I believe for your unemployment, that's generally, you have to report all sources of your income, any income you're receiving. I believe that, you know, the tax and the Department of Unemployment Assistance are pretty liberal on what constitutes income. So I believe you would have to report that. And also because things like crowdfunding and crowdsourced fundraising, that's not tax exempt. So I believe that's even more reason that you'd have to include that and report it. Do you have someone that speaks Spanish? Yes, we do. I believe so. I know that we have one of our board members speak Spanish, and they've been helping us with translating our resources. And I think we also have other staff members that are Spanish speakers. So yeah, feel free to reach out and contact me, and I'd be happy to assist with that. I think that's all I got right now.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Luke. Luke will be on the call for the rest of the time, which we'll have about 20 minutes at the end for any other questions. So I would love to move on to Emily from Mass Creative.
Hello, all. So I'm going to both share a little bit about what you're seeing on the slide right now, and then I've got I'm going to go rogue. I'm going to call an audible with a couple of other updates. So the first thing is, so the CARES Act 1.5 was signed into law last week. There is additional replenishment for the Paycheck Protection Program, as well as EIDL loans. We know that the EIDL loans are available to independent contractors. So please take note of that. The other thing that was included in that bill was $75 billion for hospitals and $75 billion for COVID-19 testing. What was not included in that bill was any resources and dollars for either states or municipalities. That was something that had been part of the negotiations, but ultimately wasn't included. Why that matters to us is because we know that the state and some of our municipalities are really looking to see what the feds are going to do to help alleviate this crisis and move us into recovery. We have gotten, we've sort of seen the economic data, both in terms of numbers of unemployment, as well as this sort of stagnation of state revenues, which is through, sales tax, through payroll tax, through all the taxes that we pay. That's the major driver of how the state is able to allocate money and build, allocates public support and investment for sectors and individuals. Without that sort of revenue flow, their ability to stand up grant programs or additional small business assistance is limited. So they're looking to the feds to see what they're going to do to help with that. There's a real belief that the fourth stimulus bill that Congress is now working on will include something along those lines, and we are keeping track of that. This is probably the point where I also am going to suggest that we all reach out to our members of Congress and just let them know how this is affecting you as individuals and citizens, and also what good work you are continuing to do in spite of that. I think we have a really great and supportive congressional delegation, both in terms of our senators and representatives, but they need to hear from us. So I will put in the chat in a couple of minutes just a link to just looking up who your member of Congress is, so that you can do that. You can just take a moment and let them know. On the state level, we're tracking a number of different pieces of legislation. We, as Luke mentioned, we were working in support and advocating for that moratorium on foreclosures and evictions. And there are a couple of other pieces of legislation that we're looking at. So one of them, which is really for nonprofit organizations, but I think is important to mention in this conversation, is that as part of nonprofit organizations are able to opt out of paying into the paying payroll tax, which funds the unemployment fund. What they usually do is if someone is let go or furloughed, then they self-pay and reimburse the unemployment fund so that when you apply for unemployment, they're reimbursing that fund that you get assistance from. And that makes sense in normal times. Clearly, we're not in normal times. Sorry, I'm looking at the chat. Alexis notes one thing, which is the SBA is unfortunately not taking new EIDL applications yet and is dealing with the backlog from earlier. So there's a hope that that will come up soon. But if you don't apply and be discouraged because it's not open yet. So the issue of unemployment liability. So the concern is that unemployment liability that many nonprofits may have if they are forced to furlough or let staff go will be so large it will make them incapable of either reopening or rehiring staff, employees and workers. So a bill was filed last week by Representative McMurtry and Representative Eliguardo from Dedham and Jamaica Plain, respectively, that would provide state resources to cover the liability for those nonprofits. This is something that we care a lot about. It's probably not the way that the bill is written. It probably won't be the ultimate and final solution, but it is really important that our sector join other nonprofit sectors and advocate for some solution to that to come online. I think, you know, one of the things that we're all thinking about is how does our sector both weather this storm and then begin to recover and reopen? And also, how are we thinking about reopening and reimagining that differently? Making sure that organizations that we all work with are still there is really important, and this would go a long way. The other piece that I want to mention is that, so as part of the CARES Act, the $75 million was allocated to the to the National Endowment for the Humanities, and 40% of that money was regranted to state humanities organizations like the Mass Humanities, which is our version of the National Humanities, it's the state version. So they came up yesterday or last week with a granting program. I'll put a link to that granting program as well in the chat. And you can sort of see just really quickly on bullets what they're trying to do. Those are, again, organizational operational grants, but I just something important to note in terms of how federal dollars are moving to the state. So I want to talk just briefly about two other things. So one of them is the census. Julia spoke a moment ago about the artist survey that we're asking folks to take and to participate in, and we really appreciate that. The census is another incredibly important data collection effort. It's the greatest data collection effort our nation does every 10 years. It's incredibly important that we make sure that everyone in Massachusetts is counted. It matters in terms of how federal dollars are allocated. It also matters in terms of how our districts, our elected representative districts are defined, right? And so we want to make sure that we're getting an accurate count. I am going to now put in the chat, if you will give me a moment to minimize the screen, a couple of things. So one is, here is a great website, Mass Counts. They are doing a lot of work to make sure that everyone is counted. There are opportunities to volunteer for that organization or volunteer to phone bank and make sure that people have the right information about how the safety of taking the census and the importance of taking the census. I'm also going to put a link in the chat to the census itself. Take 15 minutes. Share with the census who's living in your home. And then the other thing to know is that they've actually extended the deadline to the census. So self-response deadline has been extended to October 13th. That's important to note. So the other thing I want to talk about, which is, if we can advance the slide one more, is that thank you very much. The Health Connector in Massachusetts has extended its enrollment period. This is obviously in part as a response to COVID-19, that they know that many people may have recently found themselves unemployed, or that their streams of income to pay premiums that they got on the open market has changed dramatically. And so they are working to make sure that everyone in Massachusetts has the opportunity for health coverage. So they have extended the deadlines. Yes. So if you want to register and enroll for health insurance that would start June 1st, you need to enroll by May 23rd. If you are looking for health insurance that would start on July 1st, that would be a registration date of the 25th of May. I know an issue and this is something that I'm just clocking in terms of the networks that I'm a part of, an issue in terms of union arts workers who are coming up on not qualifying for enough work weeks to make their health premiums, that's a real concern. I just want to make sure people know that this is an option as well. I'm now going to put a link to that in the chat. As Yes, and there's a note in the chat box. It's really important, and I'm going to say it out loud. It is important for all to know that the census is they are no longer asking immigration-related questions, which is often a barrier for many to complete the census. It only takes 15 minutes. So correction, I don't know why it took me 15. It only takes 10. So the other thing to know is that at Mass Creative, we are monitoring and working with our partners like the VLA to think about different pieces of policy and legislation that are affecting many different pockets of the creative and cultural sector. And so as things come online, we will be sure to let you know about them. If there are pieces of policy that you know about in your circles or are advocating for, that relate to the creative sector or intersectional in nature, please feel free to give me a holler. My email was up on the slide. I'm gonna put it in the chat box as well. Thank you so much for the time, and I will be here to take any questions you might have.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Emily. And like Emily said, she will be with us for the rest of the call. So if you have any other questions, please feel free to put them in the chat and we will get them to her. All right. Next, just so that everyone knows, the City of Boston's website does have a listing for arts events and virtual events that artists are having. So if you have any that you'd like for us to amplify, please submit it to the boston.gov/arts-support. Julia, could you put that link in the chat room since I'm recording? And just so, like I said, if you have any events coming up and you'd like for us to amplify them, please submit them there and we will be able to put them on our website. All right, and now we're gonna leave the rest of the time for any questions that anybody may have for our guests. Please feel free to use the chat and we'll be able to read them aloud. I think Elizabeth's on the call, and if you can, it'd be great if you could read the questions aloud like you did last week. Thanks, Julia, for putting the link for the virtual events page. Any questions from anybody?
I did want to mention that Eva Rosenberg mentioned in the chat, if you didn't see it, that the Cambridge Artist Relief Fund is also open to artists to play, rehearse, perform, and teach in Cambridge, so not just residents.
Thanks so much, Julia.
And I have one other thing to mention, if that's okay.
Go
So
for it.
this has to do with the Governor Baker's extension of the non-essential closures. In today's press conference, when he made that extension for the entire state, he also announced that he had put together an economic recovery task force. That task force is primarily led by members of the administration. So Secretary Keneally, who is the head of Housing and Economic Development, as well as, I'm sure, Secretary Sutters, who is the head of Health and Human Services. There are representatives from the private sector and from the academic space, medical and academic space. Obviously, what is missing from that list?
I'm so sorry.
No, don't worry. We're all living our lives with dogs and families and lots of noise. So the creative sector is missing from that economic working group. It's something that we clocked, and we are trying to work on how it's best for us and for us as a sector to advocate for our voice to be heard in any economic recovery work that's being done. I don't have an immediate answer for how we're going to address that right now. We're kind of learning this news in real time, but I did, in case anyone saw that, I want you to know that that's something that we're looking on, and that we will more than likely need some larger grassroots or advocacy on. So, and I'm a little depressed to see that we're not included, but that's not going to stop us from asking for what we need to be part of the strong economic engine of Massachusetts.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Emily, for that update. If there aren't any questions, if people have topics or things that they would like for us to talk about or bring specific speakers, please leave that in the chat as well. We do want, these meetings are for the individual artists and creative workers. We want to be able to give you all the resources that you're looking for and any answers to the questions you may have. So please feel free to leave any of those thoughts in the chat, and we'll try our best to bring that up into our next meeting. Any of the speakers have any final thoughts or updates they'd like to share?
I think just on behalf of our office and Mass Creative, I just want to repeat myself with how thankful we are that you're all going to take this wonderful survey for creative workers throughout our state. It's tremendously helpful for our work in advocating for what creative workers need. And so thank you all so much for doing that, and just for being partners and sharing it out with your communities. We really appreciate it. And the link is in this chat, and we also will follow up with it.
Thanks so much, Luke, for sharing that. Who do we talk to about adding creative representation to that task force?
Yeah, so Sabrina, that's the question right now. So we're working on it. Obviously there'd been some sort of formal overtures and communications to the administration. So as we literally were learning this in real time and sort of working to make a strategy about that, this is something that we are certainly going to want to loop back and talk with you all about. And it will take a larger effort among all of us to, I think, get that to happen. The other thing is that the way that task force is charged, they have to submit a report by May 18th. That's what they're doing. They're submitting a report. So the other piece of this is that our advocacy work and making sure the creative sector is both visible and has what we need in order to be part of the overall economic recovery of Massachusetts is not going to be exclusive to that task force. It's incredibly important, but it's not going to be the only thing. So I think that we're in the coming days and weeks, Mass Creative will be sharing more about what you can do and engage in that work. And thanks, Sabrina. Glad to have you on board.
Yes, over time, if you are able to keep us posted on ideas for how to practice and perform safely as we enter those realms, that would be helpful. It may take a long while before that happens, but thank you. Yes, we are in the process of figuring out the potential scenarios of what that may look like for artists. So we'll continue to have that update during these meetings as well, and be sure to post any of that on the boston.gov website, especially on the Department of Arts and Culture. So look for these meetings to figure out, or I should say, to come and know what we're hearing. Right now, we're still in the very beginnings of what that could look like. So there are some conversations happening. I actually just heard from the Globe, they're doing a panel tomorrow at 1 p.m. Called The Next Act, a stage set for change. And a few artistic directors are talking about what the future may look like for artists and for different artists in their realm. I'm not sure what they're hoping, what the answers are to those questions, but they are going to be talking about it. I will send that info and put it in the chat in just a second if anybody else is interested in joining. Any other questions before we close out? Just a reminder, we are recording the presentation, so if you weren't able to see it or if you'd like to share it with others, you will find it on our boston.gov website. And we'll also be sharing the presentation with the participants. Is there a way we can get all the links on one document? Sure, we can totally work on getting the links onto one document and updating it on the website, for sure. Thanks for that. Any other questions or things that people would also like to see in the coming meetings? All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining us today. We'll be sending out the PowerPoint presentation to our participants and posting the recording of this presentation on our website. So if you have any questions or would like to share it with anyone, please feel free to do so. Like Julia said, please fill out that survey. It's really helpful for us to know the impact that individual artists and creative artists are experiencing during this time, so we're able to advocate for us to get the funding that we need to survive. We are going to have these meetings weekly at 4 p.m. So please look out for the next meeting next week, May 5th, I believe. Oh my goodness. At 4 p.m. We'll be having our next update for you all. Thank you all so much for coming and have a great Tuesday.
Pascal, did you see that last question?
No, could you actually read it? I'm so sorry.
That's okay. I was invited to a meeting where they are providing a walkthrough of or what documents to have available to apply.
For the, what meeting is this for?
They didn't say. Angela, is this for
a relief fund or one of the artist grants? Do you know which grant? Sure. Yes. I'll put my email in the chat, so you're welcome to email me and we can figure that out for you, Angela. Thanks so much. Anybody else with final questions? Of course, totally understand. Yes. Why don't you email me, Angela, and we can figure out how we can help you through that.
And I'm just dropping the link for the Boston Globe event that Pascal mentioned earlier into the chat right now.
Awesome. Thanks, Julia. Great. Thank you all so much for joining us. We'll have our next meeting next week, Tuesday, May 5th at 4 p.m. Please let me know if there are any other things you'd like for us to talk about or topics that you're interested to know or even speakers you'd like to hear from, and we'll do our best to have them at the next meeting. Hope you all have a wonderful Tuesday, and we'll see you next week. All right, it's just the three of us now.
Oh, good. Okay.
I'm gonna